Well, Candy, first of all, let's recall what has happened in the last several days. There was a hateful video that was disseminated on the internet. That sparked violence in various parts of the world, including violence directed against Western facilities, including our embassies and consulates. But let's remember what has transpired over the last several days. This is a response to a hateful and offensive video that was widely disseminated throughout. This is a spontaneous reaction to a video, and it's not dissimilar, but perhaps on a slightly larger scale than what we have seen in the past with the satanic verses, with the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad.
You talk about this as spontaneous. Can you say definitively that the attacks on our consulate in Libya that killed Ambassador Stevens and others, their security personnel, that was spontaneous element to it?
Well, let me tell you the best information we have at present. First information that we have available to us today. Our current assessment in Benghazi was in fact initially a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo.
If you look at foreign aid, U.S. direct foreign aid to the two countries involved here in Libya and Egypt, this is what you see, $200 million since 2011 to Libya, over $1 billion a year to Egypt. And yet Americans are seeing these kinds of protests and attacks on our own diplomats. What do you say to members of Congress who are now weighing whether to suspend our aid to these countries if this is the response that America gets?
Well, first of all, David, let's put this in perspective. As I said, this is a response to a very offensive video. Our current best assessment, based on the information that we have at present, is that in fact what this began as was a spontaneous, not a premeditated, response to what had transpired in Cairo. I don't know on what basis you make that judgment, but let me.
It just seems that the U.S. government is powerless as this maelstrom erupts.
It's actually the opposite. First of all, let's be clear about what transpired here. What happened this week in Cairo, in Benghazi, and many other parts of the region was a direct result of a heinous and offensive video that was widely disseminated as of the present, is in fact what it began spontaneously in reaction to what had transpired some hours earlier in Cairo. There was a violent protest outside of our embassy sparked by this hateful video. Soon after that...
You do not agree with him that this was something that had been plotted out several months ago?
We do not have information at present that leads us to conclude that this was premeditated. Based on what we knew on that morning, was provided to me and my colleagues, and indeed to Congress, by the intelligence community. That information turned out in some respects not to be 100%
Sunday show
correct.
appearances, the Senate report confirms that an email from the CIA's top officer on the ground in Libya to a CIA leadership in Washington emphasized that the attacks were not an escalation of protests.
She said, when discussing the attacks against our facilities in Benghazi, I relied solely and squarely on the information provided to me by the intelligence community. Everyone, particularly the intelligence community, has worked in good faith to provide the best assessment based on the information available.
About the allegations leveled today by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes that Trump transition officials, including the president, may have been swept up in surveillance of foreigners at the end.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today. So today, I really don't know to what Chairman Nunes was referring.
In the last few weeks, the New York Times has reported that in the final days of the Obama administration, individuals went out of their way to spread information throughout the government about what they knew about intelligence that the Russians had interfered in the election last year, and that there may have been a connection with Trump campaign officials.
Aware of any connection. I had read the New York Times story. I must say, Judy, as one of the most senior White House officials and the most senior responsible for national security, I found that report a bit perplexing. I was not aware of any orders given to disseminate that kind of information. Well, what is that the president did request back in December
the intelligence community compile all of the information that it had on what had transpired during the campaign with respect to the Russians involving themselves in the presidential campaign. And that report...
And member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senator Paul, always good to have you on, sir.
Thanks.
You said yesterday this is a smoking gun, the Susan Rice story. You called it an enormous deal. Why do you disagree with Bill Press?
Well, for years, both progressives and libertarians have been complaining about these backdoor searches. It's not that we're searching maybe one foreign leader and who they talk to. We search everything in the whole world. There were reports a couple of years ago that all of Italy's phone calls were absorbed in a 1 month period of time. We were getting Merkel's phone calls. We're getting everybody's phone calls. But by rebound, we are collecting millions of Americans' phone calls. If you want to look at an American's phone call or listen to it, you should have to have a warrant, the old-fashioned way, in a real court where both sides get represented. But a secret warrant by a secret court with a lower standard level because we're afraid of terrorism is one thing for foreigners. But both myself and a progressive, Ron Wyden, have been warning about these backdoor searches for years and that they could be politicized. The facts will come out with Susan Rice, but I think she ought to be under subpoena. She should be asked, did you talk to the president about it? Did President Obama know about this? So this is actually eerily similar to what Trump accused them of, which is eavesdropping on conversations for political reasons.
But the idea, the problem with Trump's tweet was that it was false. But what we have now is a story that seems to be true, which is, and again, what Senator Paul is saying is, they have the ability, if you have any contact with overseas, if somebody you don't even know they're overseas contacts you, that our government has that ability to come after us is chilling precisely because it can be used for political purposes. And when Bill is saying, oh, the National Security Advisor is not political, it's somebody who serves at the pleasure of the president. And we know Susan Rice, we know her history, we know that she spun us into the Libya war. In my memory, people who lied us into wars are not looked on as these apolitical, intelligence assets. This is a scary thing that's happening.
Yeah,
The objections that civil libertarians have had to this program is that you've lowered the standard. We'll spy on foreigners at a drop of the hat. We have no standard of the Fourth Amendment at all. And some of that I can agree to. But by rebound, we're collecting millions of conversations of Americans. Those should be protected by the Fourth Amendment.
You call this a smoking gun, which says that you believe this proves some sort of collusion, perhaps, between the Trump campaign and Russia. What do you believe it's a smoking gun for?
The smoking gun is that President Trump said that he was wiretapped. We don't have wires in our phones anymore. Nobody actually literally taps a wire. They might on occasion, but for the most part, we use the term wiretapping to mean eavesdropping. So now we know that someone in the Obama administration was eavesdropping and specifically searching a data mistake to downgrade this and say, oh, it was just incidental, it's no big deal. It is a huge deal that we are collecting millions of Americans' phone calls and that someone can go to a keyboard and put your name in and search it without a warrant. This is an illegal warrantless search. This is the kind of stuff that is rife for abuse from either party. And Joe had it exactly right when he said, if Dick Cheney did this to the Obama administration, Bill and every other leftist in the country would be on the other side of this issue. Here's the thing is you can order the specific listening device, or you can say, you know what, we already have it, and it's this amazing reverse targeting, and we have millions of people in a database, and I can be Susan Rice and go down and type Donald Trump or General Flynn into a database, and boom, up comes all this information. Is that not the same as ordering the surveillance? They know it exists. Look, every international businessman or woman who talks overseas is in that database. Do we want political officials to be able to type in the name of Bill Gates and find out they have a deal going on in Europe?
But that's not my point.
I believe Susan Rice abused this system, and she did it for political purposes. She needs to be brought in and questioned under oath. Whether President Obama ordered this or whether he knew about it, that is a big deal. If the outgoing administration was actually literally sifting through things, and part of his administration already said we were going to scatter, we were going to get as much information, we were going to scatter it out there publicly to try to harm the Trump administration. This was a witch hunt that began with the Obama administration, sour grapes on the way out the door. They were going to use the intelligence apparatus to attack Trump, and I think they did.